Thank you so much for joining us this morning, or this afternoon, depending on where you are. And for those of us who are joining us in the afternoon, thank you very much. We appreciate it during fasting and iftar not too far down the road. Thank you for joining us this morning. It's about a fairly serious topic. This is part of MEI's week of events on climate change. And specifically, today's event is on Egypt. Okay. Egypt is like most of the other countries in the Middle East. It is going to be feeling climate change significantly more than perhaps other parts of the world. And climate change in Egypt can be felt in various ways. Among them is rising temperatures, which affects a great many things, among them agriculture. And of course, agriculture is integral to Egypt's economy, and water shortage, which we will be discussing afterwards. Those problems are compounded by Egypt's burgeoning population and the need for the country to keep up with that population, with development and a growing economy. So the question is Egypt capable of keeping up with its population? Is it capable of continuing to grow its economy? And is it capable of doing it in a way which will protect those future generations going forward under the strains of climate change? We have a superb panel with us this morning, and I'd like to thank them. And in the order to which I will direct questions to them, Dr. Henny Swelem of the American University in Cairo. We are very, very happy to have him this morning. Ms. Rima Sadi, who is the Principal Regional Manager at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and Ms. Sara Al-Battuti, the CEO of eConsult. You'll find their full profiles in the invitation that was sent out, so please do take a look at them. And I want to kick off straight away because we don't actually have very much time. Dr. Swelem, and before I do that, I'm just going to ask each of the panelists to just give us a tiny little introduction just to set the tone for the discussion, and then we will start a moderated discussion. Please do send in questions afterwards, because or feel free to send them during the entire discussion, because we will be taking questions. You'll find that there's the Q&A section at the bottom. They'll come straight to me. I will either inject them into the conversation, or we may keep them all and have them towards the second half of the conversation. But we would like to have your questions, so do please feel free. All right. Thank you so much. And Dr. Swelem, I'm going to kick off with you to ask you just to give us a very, very quick rundown on how Egypt is facing down or not facing down the challenges brought on by climate change.
Thank you very much for the invitation and for organizing this very important session, especially on a topic that actually it's a very hot topic, not only in Egypt, but it's globally. And since Egypt has many challenges, achieving sustainability in Egypt also is a challenge, but it also creates a lot of opportunities and potential for researchers, academicians, and also practitioners. First, sustainability, as you all know, I mean, the traditional or the typical definition of sustainability is to meet the present challenges or present expectation without compromising the ability of our future generations to meet their needs. So, which means simply, if you are using the water, then yes, use the water in an efficient and sustainable way so that you can allow the next generation also to use the water. And when I say water, means quantity and quality. So please keep the water clean and don't exceed your uses, and then don't leave any water for the next generation. Of course, you all know that the UN in 2015 has launched the SDGs, or the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, that should be achieved by the year 2030. So sustainability is not only an Egyptian challenge, it's a global challenge, and Egypt is part of this. And I think one of the very positive things that Egypt did in 2016, I think I remember it was in February 2016, just like 5 years back, Egypt has launched its own vision for sustainable development, which is really orienting the sectors in the country to help and support the achievement of its own sustainable development strategy, but at the same time being in line and harmonized with the 17 UN global SDGs. So first keyword here is Egypt Vision 2030, which you can call it also Sustainable Development Strategy of Egypt. And it's also in line with the Sustainable Development Strategy for Africa 2063. It has different dates or deadline, but it is also fitting to this. Most of the characteristics of the Egyptian strategy for sustainable development is around people. So it's talking here about meet the ambition of the Egyptians to improve the efficiency and have the basic services, but also the quality of life is one of the important keywords that comes in the Egypt Vision 2030. Strengthening and empowering the civil society, develop a unified long-term political, economic, and social vision as the basis for the short and medium-term development plans of the country. It's a very optimistic plan, let me say, but why not? I mean, Egypt has the resources, has the human resources, also mainly young people to achieve this. If we invest more and focus more in education, I see it's achievable actually. Yes, it's planning that to put Egypt among the top 30 countries in many sectors. One of the things that this strategy is focusing on is to put Egypt among the top 30 in anti-corruption, or in the size of the economy, or the quality of life, market competitiveness, human development. These, of course, are very difficult, but why not? I mean, I always have to be optimistic about how we are seeing our future. Speaking of sustainable development and ignoring climate change don't work together. So we have really to think of climate change. We have to think of the impact of climate change on our resources. Take, for example, climate change in relation to water. There is a huge challenge that's facing Egypt from many dimensions. We can talk about them later on, but especially the interrelationship between climate change and water. And here, when it comes to climate change, and we have to speak about hydrological extremes, floods and droughts. These are the extremes that we have to consider. The floods are not very big problem. Yes, it is a problem in the city planning. Maybe Sarah will talk better than me about this, but it's still a challenge. At the same time, drought is causing a lot of problems for us in the future. How we are going to deal with this, what type of cropping pattern, how we are going to change our habits, public awareness, enhancing our capabilities, use of technology. All of these are keywords that we need to discuss them, but since you said 3 minutes, let me stop first for here and allow my colleagues to intervene, and then we can come back in the Q&A. Thank you.
Right, thank you so much. It does actually set up a lot for the discussion. We'll be coming back to all of that. But let me move to Mrs. Sadi, who, with her role at EBRD, I'd like to just ask you to to maybe give a quick rundown, but there will be a couple of specific questions as well.
So yes, thank you so much. Happy to be with you all. And as Dr. Hani just said, climate change adaptation is the challenge. I mean, we do have climate change happening. The adaptation and the resilience to it is our main objective in the coming period as EBRD. EBRD, as I hope everybody knows, is a development financial institution that is owned by 65 countries and operating in 36 countries. For across all our countries of operation, adaptation to climate change is key in all our investments. And we're trying to indicate this, that there's a climate risk assessment measures in all investments. So I'll be talking more on the private sector and on investments that has an impact on climate. And I would like to differentiate between two types of investments. We have the big investments that we have with the government or with the big corporates. And this is part and parcel of it is risk assessment. I mean, the climate risk assessment. And it's easy for big corporates to integrate it. I mean, it is part of their SDGs. They're more aware. What is more challenging is the program that I actually run, and I run it in Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, and West Bank. And this is the SMEs. And SMEs constitutes more than 80% of our economic units. So most of the production and most of the work is being done on the SME sphere. And these are the more challenging investments. These are the kind of clients that are not fully aware or fully convinced that they have a role in climate change adaptation, and that actually a big part of that falls within the domain of the SMEs and the way they produce, the way they build, the way they operate the businesses. So I'm happy to be with you on the panel, looking forward for discussions, and over to you, Merit.
Thank you so much. That was to the point and direct. Thank you so much. Sarah.
Hi, thank you, Mirat, for inviting me to speak, and happy Earth Day today. As you can see, climate change is crawling up to the headlines once again, and there are many expectations that with the rejoining of the US and further commitments and ambitious goals from the US and China, that this will regain momentum in the discussion. So if I was just to set the tone taking from the ecosystem that Dr. Hani and Dr. Reem were talking about now, which is the financing and then sustainable development and where we're going, I think there's a huge opportunity to bring climate change to the forefront. And this is coming on the heels of COVID. If we look at what happened with COVID, COVID came as a shock, which was interpreted as, and it still is, a very human level shock. It looked at the cracks and the challenges to the healthcare system in terms of practice, policy, and governance in the healthcare system. And then it's now interpreted into macroeconomies, into regional economies, and what we're going to do about that. Climate change is not going to come as a shock. I mean, the discussion has been there, the science has been there, and the networks for people to feel what is going on will not give government and corporates as much leverage and room to for trial and error as it is with COVID. And that's a very harsh assessment, but at the end of the day, the warnings are there. We know the challenges. What is needed for climate change is to humanize the science as much as possible and bring it to the level of the day-to-day lives of people. So you know how COVID affects you. It affects your health, your behavior, your household, society, and then eventually on the national level, what's going to be done. Humanizing climate change is, I think, the best way forward for people to see to what extent this is infiltrating our day-to-day lives. It's not abstract and it's not further away. And later on, I'll be probably discussing how it affects different demographics. And which groups are, how it disseminates itself in the livelihoods of different people from urban and rural communities. So I think it's a fantastic discussion when it comes to Egypt. The very fact that Reem, Hani, and Sarah have discussed this we are familiar to each other, means that there is a kind of conversation on the national level and on the expert level happening, which is a very good sign. And I think Egypt's role in doing something on climate change for itself derives from the pressing need for economic reform, with one of which climate change is affecting. So I'll leave it at that, and then I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thanks so much.
All right, thank you all so much for the introduction. Let me jump straight into the questions, because we're looking at it hopefully in a holistic manner. We're looking at it at a government level, we're looking at it at a private sector level, we're looking at it at a people-to-people level. But let me go back to Hani for a second, because Hani mentioned Egypt's 2030 goals. And you're right, they are ambitious. Right. And you're right, it is important to be ambitious rather than to sort of aim for halfway and hit lower. One should aim for the top and possibly hit lower. How is Egypt moving forward towards its sustainability goals? Which of those sustainability goals, because there are many, which of those sustainability goals do you think is more urgent? I mean, obviously you are involved with you are a leader on sustainable development and specifically on water. And specifically, those are two areas in which the situation is fairly urgent for Egypt. Right? How is Egypt moving forward on its sustainability goals? And what are the most urgent of those goals?
Yeah. If I start from the most urgent, because as you know, they are covering all the sectors in Egypt, and which I don't think I would be able to cover. But taking the most urgent topic, which is water and how Egypt is dealing with it. You know the challenges of water for Egypt. First, before coming to the climate change, the challenges of water are two big ones, two huge ones. First, the population, the increase of population. So when we had this 55.5 billion cubic meter per year for the entire country and all the sectors, the population in Egypt was 27 million inhabitants. Today we are 104 and we still have the same amount of water. So the number of population has increased fourfold, but the amount of water not changing at all. So what the government is doing right now is trying to catch up this huge challenge in terms of increasing the resources. At the same time, while increasing the resources, using the water in a more efficient way. This will bring us to the second challenge. And the second challenge is the competition that's happening in the Nile Basin, mainly with Ethiopia, with the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. At one hand, you want more resources. On the other hand, you have a huge challenge of receiving less resources in the future. So these are the challenges that the government is taking actions in the last 5-6 years. I give some examples for facing this challenge. The government has started a huge program in water desalination and water treatment. And we can give too many technical details, but I don't think this is a platform for that. So recycling water, desalinating seawater to be used for drinking mainly. In addition to that, increasing the efficiency of the agriculture sector. You might not know that the water is circulated in Egypt, especially the agriculture water, 2-3 times to face such a challenge. So all of these are actions that the government is taking in the last 5-6 years to face this challenge. Add to that the climate change. And the climate change is going to affect also the temperature, and the temperature is going to affect the consumption of the water, not only the municipalities, but also the drinking water and mainly the agricultural water. So also here, the government is trying to adapt to the climate change by using different cropping pattern. You might heard already that the government banned growing rice in the future. This is one of the actions that has been taken in the reducing it and then banning it. So all of these are actions that the government is doing its best. A, to face that challenge. B, is to be in line and on track for achieving the SDGs.
So just to take up something that you pointed out, you did point out that Egypt reuses water. I know that Egypt actually recycles water more than any other country in MENA. And, you know, yes, there has been an attempt to handle agriculture and crop management better. The question for you really is one that links into something that Sarah brought. How easy is it, or how successful is the government at attempting to, because with agriculture, you have two sides. You have the government, which is asking people to do something, but you have agriculturals, you have farmers, and up to 30% of Egypt's economy is directly caught up in agriculture. How easy is it, how successful is the government being in persuading farmers that they need to change their lives? Because for Egypt, when you say stop growing rice, stop growing cotton, these are things that we, you know, that Egypt has been growing for thousands of years. Has there been success at trying to get people to rethink the way they, you know, the way they practice agriculture? Has there been success in the way the water is being used rather than flood irrigation, for example?
Yeah, I think that's a very, very important point, and it's a serious challenge because sustainability is about interdisciplinarity. Sustainability is about interacting factors together. So sometimes when we come like an engineer like myself, who knows, now we stop growing rice because the crop water requirement, and then start calculating the crop water requirement and say, okay, by the end of the year, if we don't grow rice, we will save this. How many billions of cubic meter of water? A traditional civil engineer will see it this way, but exactly what you mentioned, what will happen on the ground. Stopping growing rice has a huge negative environmental impact because you are keeping the balance in the delta area. You are irrigating the crop, so the water is leaking to the groundwater, and the groundwater table is staying stable. If you stop growing rice, and on the other hand, people are pumping groundwater from other side, then the groundwater will be depleting, going down, and the seawater will enter to the groundwater. So it's a complicated engineering process that happens. At the same time, the farmer is making profit out of the rice. So if you stop growing rice, then you have to provide an alternative so that the farmer can make the same level of income, if not more, so that they can survive. That's why we say sustainability. It's not only about economy, it's about economy, ecology, and society. And that's what we're trying to do with the Egyptian government, is trying to balance, okay, if you stop the farmer from growing rice, what are the alternatives? What will be the impact on the groundwater? So why you have to keep balance of irrigating water in some areas? This balance, I cannot say is 100% achieved, but at least some serious and some important steps have been taken. I think we have a good government to a certain extent now. They really respect advices, they respect science. So at least we work very closely with the Ministry of Water Resources, and we advise them, and we see our advices are really implemented when we speak about sustainable actions. So please, when you take action, think about the consequences on other pillars of the sustainability. So yes, but not 100%. We still a lot to do. There's still a long way to go, especially the point you mentioned. The economy and the socio-economic dimension of such actions, there's still a lot to be done. We need to help the farmer in their income generation models, because agriculture and the farm at the end has inputs and outputs, and you have to make profit. Otherwise, it's not enough that you say, stop growing this without thinking of the profit. So there are some varieties that have been introduced recently, but there is a lot to be done still.
Thank you so much. So on trying to make it possible for people to earn a living, let me jump to Reem. Thank you for joining us today. So Reem, EBRD has sunk over 7 billion into Egypt over the past decade or so. All right. My understanding is that at the moment, one of your biggest emphases is green financing and SMEs. So for any of this to succeed, the private sector has to be fully on board. Can you maybe talk us through how EBRD thinks that that's going to happen in Egypt?
Okay, thank you. So actually, as we have said, as we all agree, this is in the agenda of everyone, of all institutions, of all developed institutions. We need to start working together with the private sector, with the government, on climate change resilience. From our point of view, what we do is we do have the finance, and the finance is usually dedicated to growth, right? And with growth, usually comes violation of climate. So people will start manufacturing or cultivating. If they do it in a way that is not correct, it will probably violate all the things that we're talking about and will lead to more damage to the climate. So there are two ways to go. One way, the first way, is to make sure that every investment we do, if it doesn't have a green impact, it doesn't have a negative impact. So for every big investment, it goes to the board with a report on impact on environment. So we're making sure that if we invest $1 in a new investment, this investment will not have a negative impact. To start with, it might not have a positive impact, but it will definitely not have a negative impact. The second thing is to start promoting businesses industries expansion in lines that actually have a positive impact, that will actually reduce the pressure on the environment, reduce the usage of water, use recycling. We promote a lot the near zero waste type of investments. So we reduce the waste as much as possible. So this is the second effort. So if you start with the minimum is that we are positive that not one penny we have invested in any of our projects have caused a damage. The second level is to make sure that we're actually introducing mechanisms and the money that we're investing is being used in a way that actually add on to the resilience, to the change. The third one is actually making money available, not only for the big investments, but also for the small investments. And the small investments are more critical and more crucial and more challenging, because SMEs, whether we invest in them money or we invest in them know-how, because we do both. I mean, when you go to the SME world, you have challenge in two areas, in access to finance, in access to know-how. Most of them know how to produce the product, but they don't know anything about the world surrounding. They don't know about that. They don't have the business acumen to do the right marketing, to have an impact, to actually do other things than production. So what we try to do is we provide know-how and we provide finance. And with both, we always try to include a green dimension. So other than, as I said, investing in big corporates and making sure that we have a positive impact on transition and a positive impact on climate, we also provide credit lines that we call them green credit line under the Green Climate Fund. And these green lines are available in 3 local banks. And the idea behind those credit lines is that this money will be invested with a bonus, with a financial bonus. So there's a cashback money to SMEs that apply for these green funds and get approved by our consultants to make it easier and clear. So we don't finance expansion with it, but we finance change in operations. So we have an SME, for example, that wants to buy new machines to replace old machines. And if our consultant approve those new machines as becoming less energy in consumption, have a better impact on the waste, on the green, they get the financing lines and they get a cashback of 10%. So it's a money investment, it's a monetized bonus for people to take those credit lines, get a cashback, and we make sure that the money has been invested in machines or in whatever expansion plans they're doing that has a positive impact. That's the second type of things that we do. The third type, which is more critical in my view, and maybe Sarah will approve or disapprove, is sensitizing the SME community to the importance of environment. Again, for them, and I'm talking about people that are small and medium with the definition of EU, so they're not the really micro ones, but these are the type of SMEs that have from 1 to 250 employees, turnover around $50 million. So these are family businesses, small businesses, medium businesses that are actually, in a way, loading or overloading the environment by the waste, by the wrong usage of water, by the wrong usage of energy, by so many things that they're doing, using a lot of plastics. But for them, they are on a firefighting mode every day to survive the business. So when you talk to them about the environment and the climate change and the problems that the whole country might face in 10 years, it doesn't really resonate. Yeah. Because these are people that need everything to be monetized. They need to know, what am I getting back out of this? Because I'm already suffering. I mean, we all know that SMEs are in a very, especially post-COVID, are in a very critical and a very challenging mode. So what they need to do is to keep the nose above the water, keep the bottom line positive as much as possible. So when you start introducing concepts like the triple P, like you need to have more, becoming more pay back to the community, make sure that you're not harming the environment, it doesn't really make sense unless you monetize it. So what we're trying to do now is run all those webinars with the small businesses and the medium businesses to raise their awareness about topics that might actually have an impact on their performance, on their bottom line, on the profits. So it's not only because you are a good citizen, but because it makes you a little bit richer. Because now we have, for example, impact funds, or what we call responsible funds. So these are funds, money, that will not invest in an SME unless this SME can prove that they have an impact, positive impact. One of them is environment. So when you start becoming, let's say, circular, we were doing a lot of webinars on circular economy. by sector. So circular economy in agribusiness, circular economy in textiles, because textiles is one of the sectors that use a lot of water.
Sorry, can you just explain the circular economy?
Circular economy. So according to the experts, and I'm not one of them, but I've been attending all these webinars, we've been working in a linear type of economy. So you have input, processed, output. In processing, the operation of production, and then the output that we sell, whether it's a ready-made garment, it's agribusiness, it's a food, whatever. The circle is when you reduce, reuse, and recycle everything. So you reduce your input, you try to reuse all the resources, and then the output that come is recycled either by you or by another factory. So we're trying to sensitize, and it's very challenging to talk to SMEs about how important it is to get a consultant and actually pay money for this consultant to review your process, find where you can actually make it better, because there's a lot of leaking. I mean, you can be using water in a very inefficient way, you can be using electricity in the most inefficient way, and with some modifications, you can become more energy efficient, better in the uses of your resources. But to convince an SME that you need to hire a consultant who's usually very high caliber, that will take money, pay the consultant so that they can give you a recipe or a manual for you to become more efficient, more climate change resilient, having a better impact, is not easy, because they don't want to get money out of their pockets. What we do is two things. We try to raise their awareness, and we try to subsidize the cost of the consultant. So we try to say, okay, it is something that we're pushing you to do. You don't have to pay the full amount. We will pay 70%, 75%, because it's in our agenda. And then what do you get in return? You can monetize this in terms of higher profits, because you are reducing your costs. You become more attractive for investors that are responsible. You become more attractive for DFIs, development financial institutions like us. So you raise your probability of raising money that is cheaper, that is better, that's more available. So this is what we try to do. It's quite challenging. We started last year. We're pushing this year very hard, but we hope that we're starting to see some impact, some acceptance from the community. We're getting more demand on our green lines that have been with the banks for a long time, but we're not really on demand, and now we're getting more demand on them. So that's it.
That was before I turn to Sarah for a quick question. That was really my question. I assumed that at the beginning it was an uphill climb. I used to, and my guess is that in your line of work, it really is all about audience participation, if you like. So are you seeing changes in your borrowers?
I am seeing changes, and again, as I said, I started to see changes in the last few years when this became critical to, let's say, exporting. So now there are some restrictions on importing products from Egypt unless the producer can actually prove that through traceability that they have been using the best practice, the things that the way they produce the product has not been harmful to the environment in so many ways, in water, energy, etc. So once this started to be implemented, now there is, there's a benefit for me as a producer in it. So we started to get more demand. And again, I think the key to this is sensitizing the community, raising their awareness, making them understand, because sometimes when they understand, they start to react. But when it's not on their daily agenda, when it's something that does not really come to their mind in the day-to-day operation, they don't care about it. But once you start talking and raising their awareness and showing how this can actually impact your business, and in the future, you can become less competitive internationally because you're not abiding to the SDG goals. You're not looking into your ESGs. You don't know what you're doing. And you can't prove that you have a good impact. It started to work. So I see this year movement. I think next year we'll have much more demand and much more interaction in this area.
Thank you so much. We've started to have questions come in from people, so I will start including them in the conversation, and I'll let you guys know. Sarah, maybe I can ask you a couple of things, because again, there's been some interest. You mentioned the impact on communities. which different communities are you speaking? Are you speaking rural communities? Are you speaking, which demographics are these? Are these issues? Do they specifically impact some communities more than others? Rural communities, women. In how is everybody being affected? Because climate change is one of those things that seems to affect. The poorer you are, the more dispossessed you are, the more you're going to feel it. So which communities are most in danger, do you think? And how does one address that?
Sure. So let's split them into urban and rural communities. So rural communities that's the tricky one. In rural communities, women tend to be the most affected because they are the ones who are marginalized from their ability to become mobile should they have to move. What happens with climate change is that once you're hit with the extreme effects of drought or flash flooding or extreme heat that's affecting the agriculture sector, usually people tend to struggle with it and then they tend to try and move. They migrate, which is this climate migration.
Yeah.
Women tend to be left behind because women have dual responsibilities. Usually they're responsible for the household. They don't have access to understanding their risk mitigation, and they don't have the access to the awareness in these communities about climate change. It's very much day to day. They don't also have access to financing so that they can have more become more independent on the value chain. So you grow, you package, you sell, and therefore they're the hardest hit. So in rural communities, which in the case of Egypt is 90% an agricultural community, climate change is hitting your business very fast and it's quite difficult to give people the skills to know how to adapt. Having said that, we must not forget that the reason why there is a buffer zone is because there exists indigenous and local knowledge that is embedded in the heart of Egyptians, that we involved in tech and stuff have not tapped into, but they know how to mitigate and adapt to a certain extent. I mean, vernacular architecture exists in it, how to assess crops and how to use day-to-day, very affordable solutions is something that they have inherited within their communities. However, with the increasing extremes in climate change, you do need more prominent interventions that are not accessible or affordable to rural communities. So this is something that it's also something that has been drawn to the attention of the government, and we are assisting the government with creating green guidelines on how to adapt to climate resilience for a very large initiative called Haya Karima, which is the upgrading of 3,000 of Egypt's poorest villages. And in that, the realization that we need to do something about climate change because it's so close to the livelihoods of 55 million people living in these villages is an extremely important step in accommodating what technology and know-how they have to forecasting what climate change patterns we will see increasing, and to create a people's brief according to their needs in rural communities and the patterns that we change. So that's a really positive step from the Ministry of Planning, is to engage into this wider conversation where it's not just about piping and rebuilding a school or lining a canal. It's actually connecting what will happen to the changing patterns offered up by this kind of economic development and climate change coupled together, and then seeing how we can adapt these solutions. So that's on the rural level. On the urban level, there is less vulnerability to flooding, less vulnerability towards other aspects of climate change, but you do have two, which is the runoff effect from having increased prices for food security. So that is something that is a runoff effect from having crop disruptions, etc. And the second one is extreme heat. So Egyptians at any point living in very hot climates, and we have reached climates that are more, that are patterns similar to the Gulf. And this is fairly new to Egypt. It's not just the discomfort and the lack of health and provision and ventilation, but it's also the fact that 30% of people's household income is going into cooling.
Yeah.
And that will increase. Whatever the means of cooling is, it means that there is an attributed budget that can otherwise be used to raise the quality of life for people that is going into cooling extremely hot hospitals, lack of refrigeration for medical goods. I mean, it's across the spectrum.
So I'm just going to butt in for 1 second, because you raised something important, the money spent on energy. Now, the Egyptian government has put a plan in place for changing over the type of power used, and there is a plan to try and ensure that 20%, I think it is, of power used is produced by renewables by 2022, which is next year. Do we know if Egypt is on track for that? I mean, we know, of course, that it does have, I think it's one of the world's largest solar power plants, the Bin Ben plant. So we know that there is work being done. Is Egypt on track with this work? I mean, will we be looking at 20%? 20% of power being produced by renewables by next year, do we think?
Egypt is well on track with this. And I'll tell you why, because it's been able to develop policies that are cross-cutting. So you have biogas, and you have also investment in renewable energy, and you have water-saving measures. At the same time, you have better risk management studies for wind energy. And you have, with the economic reforms that happened and the removal of the subsidies on energy in 2016 onwards, this was a very critical point, and at putting a price on a commodity that was treated as if it was there for free. And we had the same thing with water. It was just abundant. Now putting a price on it and having a true commodity price on this automatically gives the responsibility for us as societies and communities to start wanting to save. So companies like myself were always, for the past almost 15 years, we've been trying to go to clients and tell them this argument. And suddenly there was a shift in fortune, because you had walk-ins saying, how do I save on my energy prices? So with reform, with policy, with cross-cutting, and also investment in R&D and innovation, the same type that the EBRD is doing, universities discussing alternate energy, recycling of used cooking oil, etc. There are more and more businesses coming into this, more and more large corporations investing, not just in their CSR, but investing in how they operate as well. Doing this, we're seeing them in Egypt, and we're exposed, and we consult them. But also with the government trying to diversify its energy model, so it's not entirely reliant on one type of energy source. So it's very much doable. What I want to just highlight is that energy is one of the pillars in the Paris Agreement, which Egypt is signed to and ratified. The one where we really have to look and challenge is the housing sector, which is under it falls housing. The population is set to double by 2050. We're going to have around 150 million people by 2025. 60% of Egypt is below the age of 30. So you do require housing. You know that this is a huge market. In 2020, the market contributed to around 12% of Egypt's national GDP. So when you have something that powerful, as the constructions industry and all of the value chain, the designers, the architects, the industry itself, the suppliers, the manufacturers, and stuff like that, you have to seek opportunity in finding solution and causing disruption and changing this, because it's disproportionate. The housing sector is the second, if not third highest contributor to carbon emissions in Egypt. It's very sophisticated. So there are opportunities there that need to be explored with what to do. How do we cut down on emissions in this very fast growing sector? So it's just an outlook on the sectoral influences in this.
Right, thank you so much. Let me just ask something. Sarah, when she was speaking, used the word abundant. If I can come back to Hani for a second, all of this, I think, rests on the idea that you have some sort of constant, that there is a base that we are working from, and you're working towards something. But let me come back to Hani for a second on one of your specializations, which is water. Now, there has been a great deal of talk over the past decade, and specifically over the past 3 years, about the threat posed to Egypt's water resources from the Great Ethiopian Renaissance Dam. So let me ask something. How much of a threat are we actually talking about? Because my understanding is, if all things remain constant, then there shouldn't be that much of a threat. However, in cases of a drought or a water shortage, then there is probably extreme threat. So in light of climate mitigation, is there a threat to Egypt's water sources? And what kind of threat and what kind of mitigation should Egypt be looking at? Hani, I think your sound is off. You're muted.
Typical mistake. So the very clear answer, because we hear a lot of interviews, a lot of interventions without letting the people to have black or white. The problem is that we are dependent on hydrology, and hydrology has flood and drought. So it goes up and down and sometimes in the middle. So the clear answer whether the GERD or the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam has negative impact on Egypt, yes or no, the answer is yes, clear. Mm-hmm. So the existence of the dam on the ground has an impact. Now, is it harmful for Egypt and Sudan? Yes, it is harmful for Egypt and Sudan. But now the international law is speaking of significant harm. So what we are trying to do is to avoid the significant harm. But there is harm, Egypt accepting it, because you need to compromise. You accept a certain level of harm in order to allow the development of neighboring country. And that has been already accepted from the Egyptian side by signing the DOB, or the Declaration of the Principles, in the March 2015. That's already behind us. We are looking to the future. The problem is that the people are speaking very tiny. They just making a zoom in to the problem and say whether the first filling or the second filling has an impact on Egypt. Guys, if you're sustainability people, or people thinking of sustainability and speak about 2050, Africa has 2063. The UN global goals or SDGs are 2030. We are always looking to the future. So the same here, the challenge. The dam will have impact on the long-term resilience of the water in Egypt, in the long-term resilience of High Aswan Dam, in the long-term resilience of the country in facing thirsty. So the first filling of the dam that no one felt in the Egypt has reduced the resilience of the country by a percentage of X. The second filling will reduce it significantly to at least 30%. Because, and you will see in the future, the level of the water of the High Aswan Dam dropping down. Yes, Egypt will absorb that because it's not 100% removing its resilience completely or destroying its resilience or minimizing it. But every time there is a water cut, there is impact on the Egyptian resilience of facing water shortage and facing challenges and facing climate change. So that's the answer to the point of this. The second important part is, this is the bad side of the story. The good side of the story is that there is a solution. That's the challenge. That's what makes us surprised. I mean, there is a solution. There is a technical solution. There is a political solution. There is a legal solution. But here we have, I don't want to exceed the objectives of this or to cross the objectives of this webinar, but Egypt has offered already 15 different scenarios for solutions that allow Ethiopia to generate the hydropower needed in all the cases. And only in the severe drought cases, Ethiopia has to sacrifice a very little amount of energy or hydropower in 2-3% of the cases over 100 years. So if we are speaking about 100 years from now on to the future, there are only 3 years that will 2 to 4 or 5 years, maximum 5% or 5 years of the 100 that Ethiopia will has to sacrifice part of the energy in order to protect Egypt and Sudan from severe droughts. That's only what's requested. And the second component, that it has to be legally binding agreement. This is an agreement between the countries for the next generations. It's not for us, it's for the people who will come after us. So it has to be binding for the countries. These two aspects are not accepted by Ethiopia, although Egypt has offered Ethiopia for this compensated part is to get the energy from Egypt. So if you're going to sacrifice X mega of energy, then we will give you this energy. So if the objective of the dam is to generate energy, the solution is on the table. If the objective is beyond the generating energy, then we cannot solve something that we don't know what is for.
All right, thank you so much. Because we're running out of time, I'd like to jump back to Reem for a second, because while discussing the dam, we discussed Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan. And I think for Reem, we've specifically discussed Egyptian, EBRD investment in Egypt. But if we take a look at it in a slightly more regional sense, because of course, climate change is not going to be interested in borders. It's not going to be Egypt. It's going to be Africa. How does an organization like yourself look to handling an issue like this regionally? I ask because, for example, if we were talking about trying to encourage exports in Egypt, okay, and you mentioned that all exports need to have a green bent to them. Like, for example, is it possible to try and start producing environmentally friendly cars in Egypt? What kind of investment would be required? But having said that, that's Egypt. In a regional sense, how do institutions like yours look to tackling this issue?
Okay, thank you. So as I said, it's a cross-cutting theme in all our investments across everything that we do. So for example, in what we call the Southern Eastern Mediterranean region, which is Tunisia, Morocco, Lebanon, Egypt, West Bank, and Jordan, this is the theme of our investments. So we invest in renewables, we invest in green, we invest in normal production that has a positive impact. Again, we also have the mandate of moving our investment to sub-Saharan Africa. So we'll start looking into investing in countries that are not countries of operation, but are in Africa. And we would like to see complete integration between business opportunities, whether in Egypt as a portal or a gateway to investments in Africa, having green in the heart of the agenda of investments. We also issued what we call green bonds. And this was done in Egypt and in West Bank, and where you actually buy the bond and make sure that the proceeds of the bonds or the money is being used in green investments and only green investments. So in a way, this is how we interact and we integrate our work across the countries of operations. And as I'm talking about my region because this is the one that I have full picture of, but the same thing applies to other regions in Central Asia, in East Europe, in Georgia and the nearing countries. So this is what we usually do in all our investments.
All right. Thank you so much. I'd just like to have one quick final question to Sarah, because it's come up a couple of times. We'd mentioned the importance of having everyone on board, the public sector, the private sector. We missed out civil society. How much work is being done with civil society in this area? How important is it to have everyone on board? And how much success has there been with integrating them into this plan, or having them lead parts of this plan?
Right. It's incremental that they are engaged, because there is an arm called civil, how we behave, that is very, very powerful in contributing to climate mitigation. And that will require a lot of people. I mean, we see this. So on a level of civil society engagement, there has been so much interest and so much passion and awareness within the youths, not just at the university level, but afterwards, to really take part in doing their own things. We have micro companies and NGOs looking into upcycling, recycling, and reusing. There's a lot of initiatives that are taken from communities to build upon, affordable and accessible solutions, and to take that. So engaging them is very important. And I think that there is effort from the government to reach out and know more about them. And this is based on successes of other NGOs and other roles that youths have taken part in with other aspects, especially like the growth of the green economy and social inclusion with social solidarity programs. But there is so much more that we need. I think encouraging people to start businesses that are involved in solving climate solutions is incredibly important, because there is no ecosystem to help you start, and they need the investment, they need the backing, they need to be connected to investors, they need that so that they can see there is a future of what is known as the fourth sector generation of businesses, which are businesses that think about solutions, function like non-government organization and charities, work as profit-making companies, but also gain a lot of influence. So there is need for us to carve more accessibility, more funding, especially for women getting into this field, more funding for them, and support. And I think it's very important to also create national heroes that are on a scale that people can, it can't all be Apple and Amazon doing the zero carbon emissions. We need to have local heroes that people aspire to and look up to. And they need to be in governance. They need to, have Arabic solutions. They need to have attainable ones, and ones that we recognize that are locally. There is no one size fits all, and we don't need to borrow solutions as much. It just makes it all distant. So I think there is an opportunity. I do think with the investment climate in Egypt now and the green recovery, there is a huge opportunity to look at these very small groups that are making a difference. They just need to be highlighted.
Right, it sounds like you should be talking to Reem about that. All right. We have unfortunately run out of time, because these events only ever sort of allow you to raise subjects and not be able to discuss them as much as you'd like to. I would like to thank our panelists, Dr. Hani Swilam, the Director of the Sustainability Center at the American University Cairo, Ms. Rima Sadi, the regional manager, the principal regional manager for EBRD, and Ms. Sara Al-Battuti, the CEO of eConsult. I'd like to thank our audience for joining us today, and do please join us again later. And remember to turn the taps off and the lights out when you're done. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.